Before you watch another World War I documentary that gets it completely wrong, you need to know this. Everything you have been taught about how the Great War started is a lie. What if I told you that a single wrong turn by a confused driver in 1914 killed more people than every natural disaster in recorded history combined? What if I revealed that World War I, the conflict that destroyed 4 empires and changed civilization forever, began not because of master political schemes, but because a teenager happened to buy a sandwich at the exact wrong moment? Here's the one fact that will change everything you thought you knew. On June 28, 1914, a 19-year-old student named Gavrilo Princip was sitting in a cafe in Sarajevo, convinced his assassination mission had failed miserably. But then fate intervened in the most impossible way, something so unbelievable that Hollywood would reject it as unrealistic. The car carrying Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to one of Europe's most powerful empires, took a wrong turn and stopped mere feet from Princip's table. 2 shots. 20 million deaths. 4 empires obliterated. But here is the explosive secret that your history teachers don't want you to discover. Those 2 shots didn't actually start World War I. The entire continent of Europe was already a loaded weapon with the trigger half pulled. And what happened in Sarajevo was merely the final tick before detonation. Stay with me, because I am about to reveal the shocking conspiracy of events that made the world's first global catastrophe absolutely inevitable, with or without Gavrilo Princip's bullets. To understand how one bullet could ignite a world war, we must first examine the Europe of 1914, a continent that bore little resemblance to the one we know today. This was an age of empires, where vast territories were controlled by monarchs who wielded absolute power. The Austro-Hungarian Empire stretched across Central Europe, encompassing what we now know as Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and parts of Poland, Romania, Ukraine, and Italy. Germany had recently unified under Prussian leadership and was rapidly expanding its influence. The Russian Empire spanned from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, while the Ottoman Empire controlled modern-day Turkey and much of the Middle East. What's remarkable about this period is that democracy was essentially an exception rather than the rule. Of all the European nations, only 3 operated as democracies: France, Switzerland, and the tiny Republic of San Marino. The rest were absolute monarchies where the word of the emperor was law, and the common people had virtually no say in matters of war and peace. But it's the Balkan Peninsula where our story truly begins. This southeastern corner of Europe was a melting pot of ethnicities, religions, and conflicting loyalties. The region was home to various Slavic peoples who shared cultural and linguistic ties, but found themselves divided among different empires. This ethnic solidarity would prove to be both a unifying force and a source of devastating conflict. The powder keg was already taking shape in 1878, when the great powers of Europe gathered in Berlin to redraw the map following yet another war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. The Treaty of Berlin granted Austria-Hungary administrative control over Bosnia-Herzegovina, though it technically remained part of the Ottoman Empire. This arrangement was meant to be temporary, but as we'll see, temporary solutions in the Balkans had a way of becoming permanent flashpoints. For 30 years, this uneasy arrangement held, but in October 1908, Austria-Hungary made a decision that would set the stage for global conflict. Emperor Franz Joseph formally annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina, incorporating it directly into his empire. This move immediately inflamed tensions with Serbia, whose leaders viewed Bosnia's large Serbian population as part of their natural sphere of influence. The annexation wasn't just a matter of territorial expansion. It struck at the heart of a growing movement for South Slavic unity. Many Serbs, Croats, and Bosnians dreamed of creating a unified nation that would bring together all the South Slavic peoples. They even had a name for this hypothetical country: Yugoslavia, meaning South Slavia or the land of the South Slavs. Austria-Hungary's action appeared to slam the door on these aspirations, but it also awakened something more dangerous: revolutionary nationalism. In Bosnia, a secret organization called Young Bosnia began plotting against Austrian rule. These were not seasoned revolutionaries, but idealistic students and young intellectuals who believed that dramatic action could spark the liberation they desperately sought. The conspirators found support from an even more secretive organization operating out of Serbia, the Black Hand. Led by Serbian military officers, this shadowy group was dedicated to creating a greater Serbia that would unite all South Slavic territories. When they learned that Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, planned to visit Sarajevo in June 1914, they saw an opportunity that was too significant to ignore. Franz Ferdinand was no ordinary target. As the future emperor, he represented the continuation of Austrian rule over the Slavic peoples. Moreover, his scheduled visit fell on June 28, St. Vitus Day, a date of profound importance to Serbian national identity, commemorating the medieval Battle of Kosovo. To many Slavic nationalists, holding an imperial ceremony on this sacred day was nothing short of provocation. The assassination plot that unfolded on that summer morning reads like something from a thriller novel, complete with wrong turns, failed attempts, and impossible coincidences. The Black Hand had recruited and trained 6 young Bosnian conspirators, positioning them along the route that Franz Ferdinand's motorcade would take through Sarajevo. The first attempt came around 10 in the morning when a conspirator named Nedeljko Vabrinović hurled a bomb at the Archduke's car. But fate seemed to be protecting Franz Ferdinand that day. The bomb bounced off the folded hood of his vehicle and exploded under the following car, injuring several people but leaving the heir to the throne unharmed. After this terrifying experience, the planned ceremonies were cancelled, and Franz Ferdinand decided to visit the injured in the hospital. Due to a miscommunication, the driver took a wrong turn, and when he tried to reverse course, the car stopped directly in front of a cafe where 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip happened to be standing. Princip couldn't believe his luck. After the earlier failed attempt, he had given up hope and stopped for refreshments. Now suddenly, his target was mere feet away, the car stationary and vulnerable. Without hesitation, he drew his pistol and fired 2 shots. The first struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck. The second hit his wife Sophie in the abdomen. Both would be dead within minutes. Gavrilo Princip was immediately apprehended by the crowd and later sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum penalty for someone under 20 years of age under Austrian law. He would die in prison before the war ended, succumbing to tuberculosis in 1918. Never fully comprehending the magnitude of what his actions had unleashed. Now comes the crucial question: how did this single act of violence in a Balkan city transform into a global conflict? The answer lies in the intricate web of alliances that had developed across Europe in the decades leading up to 1914. These alliances were born from a mixture of fear, ambition, and the complex balance of power that characterized late 19th century Europe. The Triple Alliance, formed in 1882, bound Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy together in a defensive pact. On the opposing side, the Triple Entente connected Great Britain, France, and Russia in a loose understanding that had evolved from bilateral agreements. These weren't simple military treaties. They were expressions of deeper anxieties and ambitions. Russia mobilized to support Serbia, honoring its role as protector of the Slavs. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, found itself at war with Germany. When Germany invaded Belgium to outflank French defenses, Britain entered the conflict to honor its guarantee of Belgian neutrality. The alliance system had created a situation where local conflicts could rapidly escalate into continental wars. What had begun as a dispute over Balkan nationalism had become a struggle for the future of Europe itself. But the alliance system was merely the mechanism that transformed regional tension into global war. The real causes of World War I lay deeper in the social, economic, and political currents that were reshaping European society in the early 20th century. First among these was the rise of aggressive nationalism, not the liberating nationalism that sought to free oppressed peoples, but the competitive nationalism that proclaimed the superiority of one's own nation over all others. This wasn't about independence or self-determination. It was about dominance and prestige on the world stage. In Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II had cultivated a particularly volatile form of nationalism that combined pride in German achievements with anxiety about Germany's place in the world. Despite being one of Europe's most powerful nations, Germany felt encircled by enemies and deprived of its rightful place in the sun. This toxic mixture of strength and insecurity made German leaders prone to taking enormous risks. The second major factor was imperialism, the scramble for colonies and global influence that had intensified throughout the late 19th century. By 1914, the major European powers had carved up most of Africa and Asia among themselves. But the competition for resources, markets, and strategic positions continued to fuel international tensions. Germany, as a late arrival to the imperial game, felt particularly frustrated by its limited colonial holdings compared to Britain and France. This resentment was compounded by economic competition as German industry began to challenge British dominance in world markets. The third element was militarism, the arms race that had transformed European nations into military machines capable of unprecedented destruction. The naval competition between Britain and Germany was particularly intense, with both nations pouring enormous resources into building ever larger fleets of battleships. But the most significant military development was the rise of mass armies made possible by conscription and industrial production. The major powers could now field millions of soldiers equipped with modern weapons. This military capability created its own momentum. Having invested so heavily in military preparation, leaders became more willing to use force to achieve their objectives. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of World War I's origins is how disconnected the causes were from the experiences of ordinary people. The decisions that led to war were made by emperors, generals, and diplomats who would never face the consequences of their choices on the battlefield. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, and King George V of Britain were not just allies and enemies. They were first cousins, all grandchildren of Queen Victoria. This fact highlights the deeply personal and dynastic nature of European politics in 1914. What would become known as the Great War was, in many ways, a family feud played out on a continental scale. The irony is that the people who would actually fight and die in the trenches had little stake in the imperial ambitions and dynastic quarrels that drove their nations to war. When British and German soldiers spontaneously ceased fighting to celebrate Christmas together in 1914, they demonstrated that ordinary people on both sides had more in common with each other than with their own rulers. Yet these same rulers had spent decades preparing their populations for war through propaganda that glorified military service and demonized potential enemies. Poets like Alfred Tennyson in Britain had romanticized warfare, while newspapers across Europe had whipped up nationalist fervor with tales of foreign threats and national honor. This propaganda was particularly effective because it tapped into real economic anxieties. For many working-class men, military service offered steady employment and the promise of adventure in lives otherwise marked by industrial drudgery. The military recruiters found their most receptive audiences in regions where unemployment was high and economic opportunities were limited. By the summer of 1914, All these forces, nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and the alliance system, had created a situation where any significant crisis was likely to escalate beyond control. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand provided that crisis, but if it hadn't happened, something else would have served as the spark. The tragedy is that so many people recognized the danger but felt powerless to prevent it. Military leaders across Europe had war plans that required rapid mobilization and left little room for diplomatic solutions once the process began. Political leaders were trapped by alliance commitments and domestic pressures that made backing down appear impossible. Even the assassination itself might have been contained if not for the peculiar combination of Austrian determination and German support. Austria-Hungary saw the crisis as an opportunity to crush Serbian nationalism once and for all, while Germany calculated that supporting its ally was worth the risk of a wider war. What none of the decision-makers fully grasped was how the Industrial Revolution had transformed the nature of warfare itself. They expected a short, decisive conflict similar to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, where superior organization and technology would quickly determine the outcome. Instead, they unleashed 4 years of unprecedented destruction that would fundamentally alter human civilization. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was neither the sole cause of World War I nor merely an excuse for a conflict that was inevitable. It was the catalyst that activated all the unstable elements that had been building up in European society for decades. Understanding this complexity is crucial because it helps us recognize similar patterns in our own time. The Great War didn't begin because of ancient ethnic hatreds or inevitable imperial competition. It began because leaders made choices, often reckless choices driven by fear, pride, and miscalculation. The young man who stepped out of that Sarajevo cafe on June 28, 1914, believed he was striking a blow for national liberation. Instead, he helped unleash forces that would destroy the very multinational empires. He sought to escape and create new forms of oppression that would plague the 20th century. Gavrilo Princip died in prison in 1918, just as the world he had helped to destroy was finally collapsing. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was dissolving, the Russian Empire was consumed by revolution, and the Ottoman Empire was fragmenting. His dream of Yugoslav unity would eventually be realized, though it too would prove fragile and temporary. The Great War that began with 2 shots in Sarajevo would claim over 20 million lives and set the stage for even greater conflicts to come. It marked the end of the old European order and the beginning of the turbulent modern age. And it all started with a 19-year-old student, a wrong turn, and a moment of fatal coincidence that changed the world forever. The lesson of 1914 is not that war is inevitable, but that it becomes more likely when leaders prioritize national pride over human welfare, when they mistake military strength for political wisdom, and when they forget that the consequences of their decisions will be paid not by themselves but by ordinary people who never chose to fight. In understanding how the world stumbled into its first global catastrophe, we might just learn enough to avoid repeating the same tragic mistakes.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.